Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
All right. Welcome to the Stoa, everyone. I am Peter Limberg, the steward of the Stoa. The Stoa is a place for us to cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge at this very moment. And today is part of our Sensemaker in Residence series. And my good friend David Fuller is going to be one of the Sensemakers in Residence for the month of December. And this is going to be an Un-Masterclass. And we'll kind of figure out together what that exactly means. But the idea here is for David to share his knowledge and wisdom that he received over his years of being a journalist at BBC, Channel 4, and recently launching Rebel Wisdom, on how to broadcast and regulate the signal of sort of this sense-making web space that a lot of us belong to. So it's going to be him sharing his thoughts, but also us collectively receiving wisdom from the group and figuring out kind of how together we can best turn that noise to signal. So that being said, David's going to share some of his thoughts, and then we're going to pivot to kind of a group activity, which David will explain further. Welcome, my friend.
Great. Yeah, it's good to be here. Quite a few familiar faces and some new folks as well. So this came from a conversation very naturally. Peter and I caught up about a week or two ago, and we were sort of talking about this space, for want of a better word, like the sense-making space, the meta web, and also my sense of wanting to, having had this experience of being part of the mainstream media and then part of the alternative media, and wanting to sort of see whether there was anything that I could bring with my sort of the skill set that I've picked up of 20 years in journalism, and whether there's anything that I can give to contribute to this space, which I think the fact that I'm making films about this, that Peter's making films about this, that lots of our friends are involved in content creation in this area, there's something very alive about the ideas that we've been talking about. I think Jim Rutt called it the what's next space. So I really like that idea. Sort of there's lots of different things, there's lots of different kind of people from different backgrounds, but this, I think all of us to a degree, and probably everyone on this call, is trying to think into what next. And I genuinely believe that the kind of ideas that we're talking about, particularly the practices that we're talking about as well, and the fact that we're kind of talking about the ideas, but also linking it to like, how can we become different kinds of people? What does that look like? What do these conversations look like? Like for me, that's the most exciting area of content that there is. So I want to see whether whether there's something that I can contribute to that. And with Rebel Wisdom so far, I feel like in a way, I'm kind of a bottleneck as much as I am kind of almost like a one-man TV studio, because as far as the media channel is concerned, from the beginning, I've been doing basically everything: the shooting, the production, the editing, the interviewing, the commissioning of the graphics. Like the whole thing has basically been, because I'm going to talk in a minute about my kind of history with journalism and training as a video journalist, and to give a little bit of my backstory before creating Rebel Wisdom, before we then sort of talk about the dynamics between the mainstream and the alternative. And then so there'll be 4 sessions altogether. And at some point during this call, we're going to turn it around and ask what people want to learn, what people want to talk about maybe in subsequent sessions. And then we'll organize those sessions around different topics. It could be technology, it could be editorial, it could be kind of the writing for TV, it could be, it could be anything. We'll sort of, that's why this is more of an un-masterclass than a masterclass, because I think there are some questions that I may have the answer to, but there are questions that I don't have the answer to, and I don't think anyone has the answer to. But I think maybe together with the the different people that we have on this call and the different experience we have on this call, maybe we can start to kind of feel into those questions together. One of which is, and that's something that I think is a real tension, is what is the dynamic between broadcast and emergent sense making? Like there is a tension there between making sense together, and it's something we talk about a lot so we've put a lot of effort into the Rebel Wisdom community since the beginning of COVID. And I know Peter's created the Stoa, and like there's these really interesting experiments into how it looks to make sense together. And the relationship between that and broadcast is something I'm really interested in. And I think no one really knows how that looks. So right now, I think we'd like to, Peter and I, we talked through the structure. So before I kind of give a little bit of history, and we've got a couple of clips to play from my previous life in journalism, I'd like to just open it up a little bit and ask what has brought people here, and what would people like to, what are people sensing into? What would they like to learn? What would they like to hear about? There's already a comment in the chat there about how do we think podcasting can be innovated and reinvigorated? It's a good question. How do you suggest doing that, Peter? People just unmute themselves or raise hands? What's the best method?
Everyone can we can take a minute and everyone can write down in the chat what they're coming in with, what they want from this series, or a question that's really alive for them, and we can kind of read it out loud.
Yeah, and I'd also like to just get a sense of where people are at. Are there people who already have podcasts, people who've maybe had a podcast, abandoned it, maybe thinking about coming back to it, people who might want to in the future, some people who are just really interested in this space and want to know how they can get involved? That would be really good to hear.
Cool. So let's take a minute, just write down what you're coming in with, and then we may pick on someone to unmute themselves and share it.
Yeah, that really helps to kind of get a sense of, I think a lot of people are coming in with sort of similar questions, what the relationship is between inquiry and broadcast. And also what I'd like to say is, like, if there are specific requests as well, I'll give my email address, and we've got 3 more sessions after this one. So if there's specific things that we want to talk about and there become sort of common requests, then we can cover those in future sessions. Peter, are you okay to maybe go through those, maybe while I'm doing my little intro? Oh, actually, you've got to queue up some pieces, so maybe it might be best if someone else could volunteer to collate these into a document or something, because I think this is a really good set of questions to chew on after the intro.
If Tyson or someone could queue up a Google Doc and put these questions in, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, we would like to maybe go into these questions at the end of this session. That's so not just for the chat afterwards, but this is really good. We could just keep going with these questions. I don't think I need to say anything more. It's great. Cool. So I thought I'd do a very quick recap of my background so far, because as we were sort of talking about this session beforehand, Peter said, "Oh, I went on your website maybe for the first time." It's like, I didn't know you'd done any of that. I didn't know that you'd done you'd been to I guess you did know that I'd been to Libya, but kind of didn't know all of the documentaries that I'd done or some of the stuff at the BBC. So I thought I'd do a very quick potted history, starting with the first clip that Peter's going to share. I think I might be the last person in journalism to have got my start through CFAX, which, if anyone here is English or British, will know what CFAX is. All of the Americans probably won't. But CFAX is, can you share that first clip, Peter? So this is CFAX. So literally, I went to the BBC, and there was an overnight shift at the BBC where you would basically you would rewrite news stories for this CFAX page, which which I did for about 2 years, primary news source for a decade or more, yeah. And the fascinating thing about this was, if you look at the structure of this, I'm looking at it immediately with an eye, like this, just looking at this now, there's an orphan on the third line. Denbighshire should not be on its own. Like, it's aesthetically quite upsetting to me to see that. So basically with CFAX, we had to write every story in 3 or 4 lines. This is really badly written, actually. It should be 4 lines, 4 lines, 3 lines, 2 lines. And then we'd have to get every headline to between 31 and 33 characters. And I did that for about 2 years. And what you end up realizing, like, it was actually a really good training module, because you just get to learn how to turn sentences around, how to change out words to get characters down. And it becomes a really, yeah, it was Twitter before Twitter, exactly. Twitter's become a thing nowadays that we learn to sort of just become more and more concise. But so yeah, I did this for about 2 years before moving on to News Online, when they actually launched BBC News Online, and then CFAX went away. And after working for BBC News Online, we can get rid of this one now, Peter. After working for BBC News Online for a while, I trained as a video journalist. And this was a time, this was 2005, and they went through a period, the BBC went through a period of training all of their news and current affair journalists in the regions as video journalists. So they taught us how to use a camera, they taught us how to use editing software. And the thought back then was that this was the future, that news was going to inevitably go towards individuals, video journalists making their own pieces, and that this would inevitably take over news. And the interesting thing is that hasn't happened. If anything, it's gone the other way. And still, most news organizations are working with a very strict split between editorial and technical stuff. So you're either a reporter or you're a cameraman editor, and those two don't really mix at all. And then there's a producer, which is a sort of third wheel of that. So most news teams are 3 people: reporter, producer, and cameraman stroke editor, often the same person. And that I find quite interesting, because it kind of, looking back on it, shows how resistant the machine is to change. Like, they thought this would free up individual creativity. They thought this would kind of free people up from the machine, and that hasn't happened. And so there was a few of us, probably not many, who came out of that experience with those video journalist skills. Most other people kind of forgot how to do the editing or the shooting and just went back into their role in the newsroom. But I was one of the few who kind of carried on doing this, and I've kind of been a solo operator since then. I then went to Channel 4 News for about 10 years. Peter, are you okay to show one of my early pieces to camera? That was 20 years ago, and the album's success helped turn Public Enemy into hip-hop superstars. They can still draw a decent crowd, even here in Norwich. But the movement they helped create has changed massively since the golden age of the late 80s. Are they still relevant?
I just want to say it feels good to be back in Norwich tonight.
Public Enemy always got your back. Cause you're looking for the same thing. It's a new thing. Check out.
It Takes a Nation of Millions was something that we set out to do, to make a statement that would stand the test of time.
There's probably about another 3 or 4 minutes of that. So that was, so for about 2 years, I was a reporter for something called More 4 News. And More 4 News was a kind of alternative take on the news headlines. And then that ended up getting shut down in about 2009. And I moved to Channel 4 News and became mostly a foreign producer there. Have you got so I ended up becoming a foreign producer at about the time that the Arab Spring started. So I ended up working at the Arab Spring. This is in Libya in 2011. And so at that time, I was basically a producer, the sort of third wheel, even though what I preferred doing was reporting and cameraman shooting and editing and having more creative control. I found myself getting pushed more and more into being a producer, which was kind of the job that I liked doing the least. And I think I was probably worst at as well. So then in about 2012, I left and started doing documentaries. And then I was doing documentaries for BBC and Channel 4 up until about 2017, on and off. I also did a couple for Al Jazeera, and that was much more satisfying. But I was generally doing research and editing and producing for mostly for other reporters. I can send you a link to stuff that was on my website about that. But then in about 2017, I started getting really interested in Jordan Peterson. I remember seeing Jordan Peterson in about summer of 2017, and I'd always been interested. So my background before journalism was in philosophy. I studied philosophy, and I've always been doing a lot of practices, spirituality, meditation, transformational work. And when I first saw Jordan Peterson and started watching a lot of what he was talking about, particularly integration of the shadow, kind of becoming more aligned to truth, a lot of the sort of the deeper content rather than just the kind of the kind of more political stuff, I thought this was really fascinating, and the sort of the deep mythologies of Western culture. And as soon as I saw it, I felt like this is exactly what is needed right now. Like, I've worked inside the newsroom of Channel 4 News for many years, and got a sense of the structure of what you might call the kind of like where the gatekeepers are. So maybe a lot of people on this call have got a similar sort of sense of like there's a deeper sense of who we are as people. There's a deeper kind of spiritual perspective that is just generally not reflected in the mainstream media. And a lot of that is gate kept through the new atheist worldview. The fact that people are worried about doing something about spirituality or religion because they're worried about what someone like Richard Dawkins might say. And so you had this guy coming up with a full-on challenge to the new atheist worldview, and also talking about the deep mythologies of Western culture. And I just had a sense that this was exactly the kind. I had a feeling that it would take off, that it was a really important story at a really important time, and that it would become hugely popular. And so it proved. And then there's the whole story of Jordan Peterson becoming like the one-man lightning rod of the culture war, which we've covered on Rebel Wisdom, and then I generally sort of followed the thread of that story, done quite a lot of stuff about the intersection of spirituality, philosophy, big ideas, and while also being really interested in what are the places where this perspective, what you might call paradigm shift or alternative paradigms, intersect with the mainstream. So for me, these are topics like psychedelic therapy, where you're actually kind of, to understand what's going on with psychedelic therapy, you have to realize that there's far more than the sort of medical paradigm. You have to understand that there's far more going on than the sort of rationalist worldview, the sort of rationalist perspective. So what I've tried to do is cover those stories, for better or worse, on Rebel Wisdom, as to like, what is that new paradigm? What does it look like? And what are the sort of pressure points of the old perspective that you can kind of see the new starting to poke through? And I'm sure we've done some of it quite well. We've done other bits of it not terribly well. And I'm sure there are lots of holes in the coverage of what we've done, but that's kind of what's really fueled me so far in terms of trying to bring forward or trying to show some of the perspectives that I think the mainstream covers really badly, and kind of looking at where, trying to kind of take often the kind of integral perspective or a developmental perspective of what does a more holistic version of reality look like. I think I'll stop there, because I feel like it would be good to maybe start to get a little bit of feedback. I don't like feeling like I'm on a monologue very much. So,
do you want to field some questions?
Yeah, my Uzi does weigh a ton. Yeah, thanks, Evo. Yeah, and I guess I wanted to kind of maybe end with a question as well. It's because, like I said at the beginning, I feel like I feel almost like a kind of bottleneck, as much as like Rebel Wisdom now has about 200,000 subscribers, which is something I'm proud of for the kind of content that we're featuring, the kind of stuff that we're looking at. But I'm also feeling more and more like there's some shift that needs to happen. Like I've been working like 60, 70-hour weeks for the last 2 years, and it feels very inefficient. And I kind of wonder whether there's some shifts or some some moves that can be made that also feel more in tune with the topics of collective intelligence that we've talked about a lot on the channel. Like we talk about that a lot, and I'm really attracted to that as an idea, but I'm also very bad at delegating. When I left Channel 4 News, they make a video when you leave Channel 4 News. If you've been there for quite a long time, they do a kind of summary of your time there, and they did a 15-minute video, and the theme of the video was "fuck it, I'll do it myself." That was basically the kind of my reputation by the time I left Channel 4 News. So that's something that I'm keen to, and I'm really impressed. I'd like to kind of give some props to Peter for like the Stoa and the sort of the move towards a more collective podcast, and a sort of a functional communal enterprise is something that I think is difficult to achieve. So yeah, I wanted to give a few props to Peter for that.
Thanks, man. We'll see how functional it is. It's still a work in progress. I have a question that can, I guess, start us off with the kind of the maybe Q&A portion. The way I see Rebel Wisdom is sort of like the edge of the world quality, or the edge of broadcast. And your talent stack in broadcast media, afforded you success in this area. And we talked about this a lot too. It's like there's a point where it almost becomes a performative contradiction if you keep talking about talking, or keep talking about community. And hence this kind of move for this integration between kind of a community space and the broadcast modality, and how to be in right relationship with the two. Like, it's not wise to discard all the old skill sets in kind of the broadcast format, but sort of like the movement towards that. And you had this wonderful talk with Paul Vanderklay about this exact topic and issue. So I wonder if you can double click on that a little bit, because that's one of the themes going throughout the chat right now as well. Yeah, that's good, actually. So this is one of the reasons I feel quite passionately about this clash between broadcast, or clash between the mainstream and the alternative, because I feel like we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater far too much, because there are some skills, like we're moving. I'm sure many people here will be familiar with Jordan Hall's concept of like the blue church, and the idea that we've got these sort of old sense-making institutions that are breaking down. I think he's largely right, but I think that's also it can become dangerously oversimplistic, that perspective, because I think what we're losing at the same time as we're losing that is something really significant. We're losing a lot of very tried and tested methods for finding truth. Like I look at the failures of the broadcast media or the mainstream media, and we can all list them, like this sort of sense of, oh yeah, the voice from nowhere, and this kind of pretense of objectivity when it's becoming more and more obvious that people are bringing their prior kind of biases, and that's becoming more and more clear. But when I look at the alternative media, there's almost none of the safeguards that were built up over generations of mainstream media. Like the idea that if you put out something, you should try and get the response from the person you're talking about. You should always, like most journalists will be trained to know both sides of any issue. And you look at the talent stacks, and you look at the incentive structures of alternative media, and it basically militates against that. Like nuance is not profitable online. It's much more profitable to
to basically find your tribe, follow your tribe, become captured by your audience, and then veer further and further away from truth. So I guess that's my concern, is that I think there is a lot of really good practice and really good knowledge that we're losing in this sort of collapse of this blue church enterprise. Like working in a newsroom, like a functioning newsroom, the amount of experience and the amount of knowledge and the amount of hard-won historical awareness in those environments that we're just losing right now because of the decline of journalism. And I guess this is the impetus for wanting to do this set of sessions, is like, is there anything that I can bring from my experience in these newsrooms to the alternative media? Because I do think that it needs it. And I think if Jordan's right, that we're basically moving fully over to a kind of, we're seeing the decline and the fall of the blue church, and some kind of collective intelligence is going to replace it, then that collective intelligence needs to fucking upskill, like seriously, in terms of the skills, the qualities, the ability to sort of to find truth. Does that answer your question, Peter?
Yeah, and it's definitely an ongoing question that all of us are going to be asking. I was wondering if I can take in Adam Robert, because he had an interesting parallel with academia. Adam, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, sure. David, I actually halved my question just because I was trying to make it a little simpler for the chat, but then you jumped right into the part that I deleted. So I think we're heading down the same path. And my question has very much been around all the advantages that we get from new media, from podcasts, from YouTube videos, from Twitter, from having shareable online articles, kind of working in the publishing space. We're able to put out things so much faster than traditional academic publishers are. We have a different kind of design philosophy, design language that kind of spreads around on the internet very quickly. So the costs are much lower. We have all these tremendous advantages, and at the same time, we don't seem to be able to create, or we haven't yet, and maybe it's just early days, kind of create like the kind of multi-generational institutions that we're sort of coming up against, that we're responding to, finding we feel that they're lacking in all of these ways. But like the BBC is this kind of venerable, long-standing institution, even if it does have the pitfalls of sort of mainstream bias and gatekeeping and all of that. But it's able to reproduce itself generation to generation. And I'm thinking about that question in terms of podcasts and online publishing, and how do we get there? And I think it's related to the delegation question that you were just kind of pondering aloud about. If each podcast or each website is sort of like a one-person show, then everything kind of rises and falls with that one person, and that's not going to kind of create a sustainable, intellectual culture that we're kind of losing right now with the universities for a variety of reasons. And so I'm just wondering how we can kind of come together and yeah, I think just sort of level up the standards, that you're talking about, norms that we've lost in alternative media, and how to bring those into the new media space. And it just there's a lot there, but that's just kind of what I was thinking about.
Yeah. And would you say that you come more from academia, Adam?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just find myself resonating with what you're saying, but replacing traditional broadcast media with traditional academia.
Yeah. And it's something of the sense-making crisis is both of those. And I remember, one of a clip that I've played a few times on the channel was a conversation between Eric Weinstein and Brett Weinstein, where they said that truth-seeking cannot survive the encounter with market forces, which was kind of, it's deceptively simple, but it's very, very true. But I think what we've realized as well, so I've also sort of tracked the whole intellectual dark web idea and from 2018 onwards, and there was this like very bombastic claim at the beginning, well, we're beholden to no one, so therefore we will be an alternative sense-making network. And they failed in many ways because of completely new, but the failure conditions for that alternative sense-making idea were different than the ones that have kind of infected journalism and academia. But audience capture, a lot of it was also just seeing how people became tribalized around certain opinions because of bad psychology. It's like you identify yourself with a certain position, you get critiqued, you get some bad critique, you start mistaking all of the critique for bad critique. Like I'm kind of coming to an answer during this. Like what I realized through watching that failure was we have to be really brutally honest, and we have to somehow create some kind of meaningful feedback, probably relationships of trust, where we're able to feed back to each other in a way that I don't see. If you don't have an experience in sort of personal growth and that kind of feedback and that kind of self-reflection, then I don't think you can do sense making. And I think looking at just the egos involved in that original constellation of people, despite the amount of there was a lot of intellectual horsepower in there, but there was a lot of kind of egoic fixation. There was a lot of reasons why people started just not being open to feedback. And I think what's also happened, just looking at that, is that social media and Twitter especially has kind of weaponized all of our worst instincts against us. And I think it's led to a lot of people hardening, constellating around the worst parts of their personality a lot of the time. And it allows us to kind of create our own filter bubbles around our particular distortions. So there's kind of, there's why is mainstream academia failing and why is mainstream media failing? And a lot of that is to do with the business model. A lot of it is to do with certain ideological, certain easily weaponized ideological positions. And why do then individuals fail as well? And I think that's why I think every time I have this question about sense making, it comes back to the work, and it comes back to we're so susceptible to our own bullshit. And I know very few people doing deep enough, willing to go into that, fully into that kind of fire of, coming back to Jordan Peterson, allowing the dead wood to burn off. Like really, we don't like to do that. And it's much, and also it's often unprofitable to do that. Like it becomes profitable to follow a certain model, especially on somewhere like YouTube. Like the Dave Rubin, if anyone's interested in this topic, there's an amazing series of films by a guy called Timber about Dave Rubin called Dave Rubin's Battle of Ideas. It's absolutely brilliant. I've done an interview with him on the channel before, and he basically looks at Dave Rubin being this sort of starting off saying, oh, there's some problems on the left. I'm on the left, there's some problems on the left. And then just getting audience captured, narcissistically captured, and ending up basically, he's now a full-on sort of pro-Trump election truther, borderline QAnon. It's astonishing. And he is a perfect example of what can happen to anyone without a kind of solid sense of self who kind of goes down the YouTube rabbit hole. And so it's an amazing piece of work, Timber's films about Dave Rubin. I'd highly recommend that. If you want to understand the failures of sense making in the internet age and the YouTube age in particular, I highly recommend that series. Was that helpful, Adam? I felt a little bit
Yeah,
all
no,
over the
that's
place, but I felt like it was kind of new territory in a way. So
yeah, no, that's really helpful. I mean, the one thought I came away with thinking new thought sort of was that our own priors that we kind of have to get rid of and evolve through as our sense making progresses are, because of social media, those priors are tied to our audience. So we're actually disincentivized from shifting priors because it could cost us people who are interested in our work, right? So somehow you have to build into the structure of your audience and the structure of your community that all of this is kind of up for grabs, you know, that we're not here to be this team, or we're not here to just sort of wake up every morning and defend, you know, this set of priors, but to actually, you know, create an evolving learning community together where we can kind of transparently you know, continue on the sense making journey together in some way. And you know, the technology kind of militates against that and gives us certain kind of incentives for not doing that. So that's kind of more clear to me now in your response. So thank you.
yeah, and this may seem like a little leap, but it's I think of someone like David Bowie. Like David Bowie continually reinvented himself. Like if you've got any kind of audience or you're putting any kind of work out there, you have to be willing to lose the audience that you've picked up to be able to kind of to reinvent yourself each time. And the great artists are the ones that are able to do that.
So, David, do you want to continue with sort of a Q&A thing to feel out this group and potentially see where the series goes? Because we did have an idea of doing breakout rooms and stuff like that, but maybe that could wait for next session.
We've got what? Got about 45 minutes. I mean, the breakout rooms would be to give everyone a chance to share about what they're hoping to get from the series, so that everyone gets a chance to kind of feel into that. What do you think, Peter?
Yeah, I'm open for either or. Maybe you can get a feel of the group, continue Q&A or breakout chat or breakout rooms. And what the idea of the breakout rooms was to kind of get a sense of how we want to structure the series, or kind of the initial questions that we put in the beginning. What ones are most alive for us?
I mean, there's so many great questions that it feels like maybe a shame to, I don't know, do we have some feedback? Who wants breakouts? Who wants to stay? Got one for breakouts, I think.
Yeah, let's see what happens. Stay in the main room.
I think it's looking more.
It's Q&A. I think it's a good idea. Let's continue it, and then next week we can design something that's possibly interactive. One question that's coming up a few times is the Consilience project that Daniel Schmachtenberger is doing. And one thing that just quite excites me about this whole space is that like people are coming in with their talent stacks. Like Adam Robert, he has this excellent para-academic journal called The Side View that is touching on the same issues that Rebel Wisdom is doing. Richard Bartlett's Inspiral, you know, the Stoa is kind of like this Burning Man thing. And we're all talking about the same stuff, but in a different way and with a different medium. And so maybe you can touch on the ecology of that, and then highlight what Daniel's doing with the Consilience project, and how that relates with Rebel Wisdom.
Yeah, I think I kind of see what I'd like Rebel Wisdom to be as a kind of airlock for these ideas. Like I think I'm not an intellectual. I'm not as well versed in the sort of the deeper philosophy as some others in this space, and I don't kind of claim to be an intellectual. I don't have the attention span for it. But what I do think I'm quite good at is being able to identify the essentials of a particular idea and express them in a way that connects. And that's what I think is that's what I'd like Rebel Wisdom to be, is this sort of membrane or airlock between the ideas that are in this space and then the world outside. That's what I'm interested in, is how do we turn the ideas that we've been talking about into more of a cultural movement, and this sort of sense of that this is an existential task as well to turn it into a cultural movement, and that's where I think and to be honest, I would like to know more about the ecology of everyone else in this space. I feel like I've been doing like 60, 70-hour weeks, mainly focused on getting films out. And I think the balance has been too much towards getting the films out and not really enough of kind of knowing what else is out there.
I've been sort of your informal man on the ground with this weird sense-making space as well. And yeah, a lot of people in this room are doing some great stuff. One of them is Aaron. He has a podcast called The Golden Shadow. And you had a question, Aaron. Wonder if I can take you in.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Hi, David. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. My question was, can the gig economy or Patreon economy of the sense-making space possibly provide the sustenance needed for it to have any impact or for it to survive? And if the thought leaders that we need can't really operate in the traditional realms, let's say, and are living on donations or handouts, how can any of this work? And what do you think the financial solution is to this?
It's a good question. I think it can. I think it's very difficult for people to make a shift from this being something that's a side hustle and something that's the main hustle. I think that's always going to be difficult. What I can say is that Rebel Wisdom has gone, especially with the online course that we launched at the beginning of the year, we've gone from being sort of barely breaking even to being quite healthily profit making. So it can be done. And I also think that there's something, it ties into the main theme about how do you make this aspirational. I think we can. I know you do shadow work, and is it sort of golden?
Golden Shadow podcast. It's like Jungian, but integrating the shadow and finding the treasure in the shadow is the theme.
Yeah. You have to make that cool. Like we have to make that cool. We have to make this whole space aspirational, and whatever is cool will attract attention, will attract funding. And I think it can be done. Like I genuinely think that, and that's why I think the aesthetics are important. That's why I think the languaging is important. That's why I think that if you can frame what we generally are doing as the next frontier of awareness or the next frontier of consciousness in a way that doesn't trigger anyone's kind of woo filters and new age kind of rejection, which most of the time it does, with kind of bad graphic design, with bad language. Like if you can find that niche of where you're not too far ahead of the curve, but you're just ahead of the curve, and it becomes something that people want to find out about, like, because systems change is too worthy. Like a lot of stuff in this kind of area just becomes too worthy or too niche. And what I find is a lot of people end up speaking to other people in their bubbles. Like if you're from the personal growth bubble, you end up writing stuff that just talks to everyone else, like fellow workshop junkies. Like how do you take a lot of this stuff? Because I think that's what we hopefully have shown with, because Rebel Wisdom also does workshops, we also do practices. And so we started off doing men's weekends, because we were teaching men's work that we built around the hero's journey, managed to get articles in the BBC, articles in the Guardian. We got more people through our workshops than Mankind Project did, and they've been going for 20 odd years, and we started 2 years ago. So I think it can be done, and I think that most people, I think there's a fear of success as well that comes in. Like I think people often express themselves in a way that feels familiar to people in their bubbles, because there's actually a fear of being seen, being being judged or being rejected by the mainstream. And I think partly we have to have more confidence in the thing that we're offering. Like I look at, I've never seen one of your sessions, Aaron, but I've seen, I think I either saw your website or saw the language, and I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. Like, and I think like the shadow work has certainly been more mainstream since Jordan Peterson started talking about it. There's an opportunity. I think there's an opportunity for you that there wasn't before. And I think that that's becoming more and more, like it's certainly becoming more and more aware, people are becoming more and more aware of it. And I think that's the case of almost all of these practices. Like, how do you frame circling in a way that is the new mindfulness? How do you say, well, circling is, you've heard of mindfulness, you've heard of yoga. Those things were fringe, weird things that strange people did back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, probably even 90s. And yet now there's multi-million-pound industries built around both of them. How do you frame circling in a way of, you've heard of mindfulness, this is mindfulness in a group. And this is what we're doing. We're getting to the edge of our experience. We are, and frame it in a way that starts talking to the unconverted, preaching to the unconverted. I think there's so much opportunity for everyone doing practice in this space. And maybe there's a need for almost like masterclass sessions for kind of workshopping language, workshopping framing, workshopping kind of ways of getting these practices out there in a way that allows people to connect to them more. But it's but fundamentally, it's like, how do you make this stuff aspirational? Because we're never going to change the world by saying you should know about this thing. Everyone has to want to.
Any follow-up question?
No, thank you. That was a great response. I don't want to eat up too much more time, so I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, one of the themes at the Stoa was steal the culture. John Vervaeke introduced that, and then seduce the culture got kind of replaced with it. I don't know if you want to speak on that, Raven. I think you're the one that coined that phrase.
Yes, I think I am guilty of that. Sure. I mean, yes, within Seduce the Culture, there's this idea of presenting something that shows instead of tells. Why is it that you would be drawn in to learn about something that goes against maybe the things that you already think about, which I think you're getting into with this idea of capturing an audience that isn't already within the subculture. So there's a kind of outward facing like signals that can draw people in who have maybe an eye for something, or something is nagging on the back of their mind that would kind of provide an opening to get into one of these worlds. I think Rebel Wisdom, like you said, is a funnel as much as it is a bottleneck to bringing people kind of deeper into the mimetic space that we've been in. My question is related to the effect of branding within that context. And like, how did you approach branding with Rebel Wisdom? And how much of an impact do you think that the way that you've specifically curated your aesthetic has drawn people in from outside the membrane into the membrane? And how can we think about that when approaching our own projects from an aesthetic perspective?
Yeah, really good question. I think I definitely had a head start with the production quality of the films. So I had so I kind of made a decision quite early on to almost solely do interviews in person. And that had the effect of making them kind of artifacts. So if you think about like how many interviews there may be with a certain person, sort of Daniel Schmachtenberger or Jordan Hall, I think you kind of recognize that, like the war on sense making, for example, with Daniel became an artifact, I think, to do with the branding, to do with the graphics, to do with the content. Obviously, I mean, the content that he came up with was astonishing, but it also had a framing within it that kind of made it a lot more accessible for people. I think I think there's also, one of my bugbears is that there's a tension between aesthetics, especially in kind of more spiritual communities. There's a friend of mine said that spirituality is synonymous with bad graphic design. And there's a real truth to that. Because if you know the sort of spiral dynamics model, it's that, oh, that's my truth. I will make something that's true. That's what I like. And it's like, no, there is and that more than anything, I think, has sort of been an aesthetic block to a lot of people getting traction, is this idea that they'll stay true to their, people are not open to feedback in the same way that I was kind of reflecting before. People are not open to feedback, especially about aesthetics. I think branding is hugely, I don't think you can get away with it because you're always branding something. Like even when you think you're not branding something, you're still branding it. So it's just whether you want it to be branded well or you want it to be branded badly. You can't unbrand something. Like everything, the way you're showing up, every choice that you're making is branding it in some way. Whether you're just branding it as, I don't give a shit how this is branded, you're still branding it. So I think, I don't think you can get away from that, but I am aware that I did have an advantage with the production skills that I was coming in with, and probably but different people will have their own different special skills or advantages. So I think you've just probably got to identify what that is, whether it's getting good interviewees, or whether it's certain networks that you're connected to, or whether it's that you see how things fit together. Like everyone will have will have some abilities or some personal brand that they can bring to bear. Did I cover everything, Raven? I feel like I went off track a little bit.
Well, I guess just a bit of a follow-up in terms of branding. Like I think you outlined that branding is definitely important. I think I would agree, particularly when it comes to trying to work between groups, because often it is the branding or the aesthetic from a distance that would be the seducing of the culture. I remember when I was first watching the Rebel Wisdom videos and I was like, ooh, you know, like this is sexy. So like it has this appeal to it and it draws you in. And then from there, you kind of begin to follow the particular individuals that are in the interviews. And next thing you know, you find yourself in the little corner of YouTube where Jordan Hall is just making, making videos. I guess so, one of the things that Rebel Wisdom, I feel like, has done is create a brand that is it's very like kind of respectable and not super serious, but it does feel like it's like a kind of a serious project and has that serious feeling to it. And I guess what I'm wondering, in contrast, like to the Stoa, where I feel like there's almost an anti-aesthetic at the Stoa, and it's very playful. So I'm kind of wondering about like the differences between like having different kinds of branding identities and how that might draw in different types of audiences. And I'm also thinking within that about women specifically. So there's a skew within the gender proportions within these groups, and thinking about like what is it about aesthetics that I think women in particular are very interested in, and what would it be like to have branding and a performance. I mean, I think that's the other thing that you were bringing up, is that this is a show. Anything you're doing is a show, and to have that be at the forefront of your thinking in terms of how you're designing your brand. So I guess that's kind of a big follow-up question.
Yeah. And it taps into, like, one thing I'm very aware of is that my aesthetic, or my way of being on camera and generally through Rebel Wisdom, is still quite kind of, there's still a lot of kind of mainstream media in there, like a lot of kind of Channel 4 News, historical, and I'd like to show more sort of, to be more natural on camera. Like I don't feel like it's terribly, oh, my battery is running low. I think I might need to grab, let me see how much. Yeah, it's saying 5 minutes. I think I should go and grab it. It does turn off occasionally. Give me 2 seconds. Peter, can you entertain everyone until I come back?
Yeah. Something came alive when Raven was speaking. I think there's like two movements. Actually, I was having a conversation with Malcolm Ocean about this, how the meta has to go meso, like meso means intermediate. And I think there's like multiple mesos you can do in order to attract people up towards the meta or like bring the message down to them. And the Stoa is like the opposite. It's like double down on the meta, or so it's creating a space that attracts a beacon for all these meta weirdos to cohere with each other, so we can have these sort of strange conversations. But I like that idea that there could be like a plurality of approaches from the meta to the meso. Tyson, do you want to share your thought?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been, as like a solo creator myself, I've been considering the appeal to being a part of some sort of collective or cooperative that is a decentralized network of people that are experimenting with sharing projects, sharing resources, support, money, even doing experiments with that, and organizing in a way that removes some of those bottlenecks or reliance on one core individual, as sort of inspired by Richard Bartlett's work. So some kind of like media, creative, sense-making media equivalent to Inspiral Network, something like that. And so I just think that for us solo creators that like have our thing, but are attracted to these more communal spaces, we should consider the experiments that we can run, and consider creating little collectives of 3 and running some of these experiments in self-organizing and decentralized organizing. So I just kind of made that comment, and there seems decent interest. Like I think I've got like 6 emails from people that are interested in just having a call and discussing this. What might we experiment with? So yeah, I'm just thinking about that, and it's something that I personally want to participate in.
Might be a worthy session to have at the Stoa. Yeah, I have actually follow up to Tyson, but David, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back.
Yeah, we were just chatting about kind of a bunch of things, but we do have about 10 minutes, so we can think about closing it now with some kind of final thoughts and setting up next week if you like.
Were there any more common themes from the chat? I mean, I guess I'd be interested just to hear what people, like, having had the an hour now, like, just people throw in some comments and thoughts about what they'd like from the future sessions.
Because the idea was to have themes for each session, so maybe it'd be suggestions of what themes that could be the attractor for each session.
Is there a balance towards towards practical skills, or more kind of framing, or could it even be that different people bring different projects and we do sort of more of a kind of masterclass workshop of different pieces? I mean, there's all sorts that we can. It's pretty open as to what we do with the next 3 sessions.
Because one idea that we probably won't do it in this series, but like getting guests on, and I'm pretty good at like leveraging the little status I have in order to get like bigger names and leveraging that, and it's a skill set that you can teach and consider. So that could be like a potential topic for a session as an example.
Yeah, leveraging guests is a definite. You can talk about your sniping theories.
Shh, top secret, the dark arts of nerd sniping.
How's I spending 60+ hours a week? Mostly editing. I mean, editing is the thing that takes the time, to be fair. And then production, it always takes about 3 times as long as you think it's going to take.
And it'd be kind of cool that sensitivity, that balance between boosting the signal, getting more views and the attention economy, but without compromising the integrity of the project and the spirit of it. Whatever that would be called. I think that's something a lot of us are thinking about here.
Yeah. I think we could definitely do a tech session. My only kind of concern about doing a tech session is that my skills are very much old school, and I generally find that there's like modern technology or different ways of doing it that are like 3 times simpler than the ways that I'm familiar with. But I mean, there's some general things like audio being much more important than video, which is something that people need to kind of learn at the beginning. Interview skill sesh, yeah. I mean, structuring is a thing that I think is really important that I hear people do wrongly a lot of the time. It's like most of my interviews, I'll structure the first 2 or 3 questions really quite strongly, and then I'll be a lot more loose after that. Like what do you need to know? Like I think the beginning of an interview is much more. Like, for example, I think a lot of people start by asking someone a generic question about their background, and actually you don't care about the person enough at the beginning, unless you know who this person is and they're famous or whatever. That's not of interest to anyone. You want to ask that, but you want to ask that 3 or 4 questions in. It's good context, but what you want is like, it's journalism 101 is like the killer fact goes at the top. Like, why are you having this conversation with this particular person? What is it that this person, what's the one reason that you want to talk to this person? Get that out first, get someone hooked, and then you've got more leeway to then sort of open it out and to talk about how did you come to this point? What's your background? Signposting is a really great, like if you've not, signposting is pretty much, that's a good like 50% of the work a lot of the time is showing, for example, with the War on Sensemaking, that's a good example of signposting. Pretty much all that was an interview with signposts through it. You just had what was he talking about when, and then the graphics just worked as signposts to sort of let you know, oh, this is what he's talking about now, this is what he's talking about next. Chris, you'll have to explain what that means. More niche than journalism 101.
Yeah, so basically just talk about your ways of approaching journalism as opposed to what is standard journalist ethics.
Yeah. Yeah, we started doing a session a little bit like that on the online course, which I can kind of maybe recap, and then we can go through that next week or the week after. Like quick heuristics, minimum viable production skill set, yeah. And there was a question before about the Consilience project, wasn't there? I think it's going to be a really interesting transition for Daniel, because it's one thing to do the kind of deconstructive work, which is what he's mainly been doing so far, something completely different to try the actual work of trying to do the actual, because that's propositional, like most of what Daniel's been doing so far. And I think most of his not wanting to isn't in no way a criticism at all, because I think he's brilliant. But in a way, anyone can project onto the war on sense making whatever they want. Like, oh, look at all, yeah, we all know that these biases exist, and we can sort of project on that everyone else is doing it. It's something completely different to be putting out, okay, what are you going to say about, let's take something at random, Julian Assange. Like I got into an argument with someone on Facebook about Julian Assange, and they said, I can't wait until the Consilience project is online and we can kind of get this sorted out. I'm like, I'm not sure that's going to work. Or what's the truth about, say, claims about Tulsi Gabbard? What is the, like, all of these things? I don't think any of the answers are strictly factual, and I don't necessarily think that the Consilience project is going to be able to resolve most of the disputes that I'm seeing between people, because they're so incredibly contextual. Like I have, just the reason I chose Julian Assange is it's an argument I get into quite a lot, because people say, oh, well, why, you're a journalist, you should be defending him, he's a journalist. It's like, Julian Assange is not a journalist as far as I'm concerned. He's an information warfare actor. Whether he deserves to be locked up, whether all of those things are kind of supplementary to that, but like then you're into the, as soon as you're into the content, then people's triggers really come up. It's like there's a whole we know the kind of well-researched, well-rehearsed arguments on both sides, but it's a lot easier to just talk about kind of more generally, like what are the failures with the sense-making space, than it is to actually set a flag down around any particular issue. I mean, I'll just give that as one example, and I'm sure that there's going to be people here who've got very different views on that. And the weird thing about the news or journalism is everyone has an opinion on it. It's like, it's one of those few things, it's a weird place to work because everyone has an opinion about the news, and it doesn't seem to make any difference whether you've been a foreign correspondent for, no one says, oh yeah, you've been a foreign correspondent for 10 years, I'll just kind of assume you know what you're talking about more than anyone else. No, people are really attached to their perspectives. I don't think I've had a single argument on Facebook where it's made any difference as to the fact that I'm a journalist or I was in Libya in the Arab Spring or whatever. It's never made any difference whatsoever. So there's some great questions here. So have we got a way, do you want to send me the chat, or is there any way that we can get these kind of collated by next time, Peter?
Yeah, there's three things. So I'll send us the chat. Tyson is going to send us a Google Doc with kind of these on it as well. And if you want to go to the Discord and if someone wants to create a channel there, kind of what we're doing with Jordan Hall's series, brainstorming how the session should be designed, people can propose ideas there, and then I can circle back to David and we can figure out how we're going to design the series. And it is a really good group here. I like the energy here and the kind of the questions being asked. So I think we're going to be in for quite a treat for the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, thank you to everyone. It really high quality questions, and yeah, apologies, I was kind of going all over the place, but I think there was some stuff that I'd not thought about before or talked about before, so it can always be a little bit rough around the edges, and that's the nature of the inquiry. And
seeing bald-headed, sexy, skinny Fuller was worth the this 75 minutes. I think it was the first time people saw that. So any closing thoughts, my friend, before we wrap up today?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground, so that was fun. I'm looking forward to the next sessions.
Very cool. So lots of sessions coming up at the Stoa. You can check it out, thestoa.ca. Jack Donovan from Way of Men is coming tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern time. Ali from Rebel Wisdom, he's going to be coming in the new year doing some sessions as well. So you can check out that there. That being said, David, everyone, thank you for coming to the Stoa today.